Christine O'Brien was already on her knees in the snow before the first church bell struck 10. One gloveless hand was braced against the frozen curb, the thin kid leather of her slipper half soaked and shining with meltwater. Behind her, through the open fanlight and bright windows of Lady Belgrave's townhouse, laughter spilled out in warm ribbons of sound. Music followed it. Violins, a little sharp from overplaying, and the stamp of dancing feet on polished boards. Someone inside had begun another anecdote, and the room answered in a peal that rose and broke like glass. She did not cry out. At 22, she had long ago learned the economy of pain. Her breath steamed white in front of her face. Her fingers, reddening in the cold, searched once at the stones for purchase. She stood with care, as if steadiness itself were a form of defiance. In drawing rooms where she had once belonged by right, women called her plain, with the brisk certainty reserved for those they did not fear. They mistook pallor for weakness, and quiet for vacancy. Yet the straight line of her nose, the solemn dark of her eyes, and the fine-boned composure of her face gave her, to kinder observers, an austere beauty that altered with expression. When she listened, she seemed grave. When she smiled, which was seldom, it came like sun through cloud. No one generous enough to love her had ever failed to see it. There were few such people left. Before his death, Captain Daniel O'Brien had kept a modest but honourable house near Hanover Square, where books stood open, accounts were exact, and promises were made as if they might one day be audited in heaven. He had taught his daughter Latin tags for amusement, double-entry ledgers for usefulness, and an inflexible doctrine for survival. Never bow your head in your soul. However low your circumstances, force your body. He died too quickly for apology and too slowly for comfort, leaving a widow by his second marriage and a daughter by his first, and enough unsettled affairs to tempt every petty appetite that gathers around fresh grief. In the 2 years since, Christine had ceased being a daughter of the house and become its instrument. Mrs. O'Brien, handsome in the heavy way of women who enjoy command, styled her stepdaughter dear child before company and useful girl in private. Christine copied correspondence, kept household figures, sorted invoices, and sat for hours as unpaid companion, while callers praised Mrs. O'Brien's endurance. In practice she was clerk, maid, and shield. The house that had once answered to her own name now treated her as tolerated furniture. If she objected, she was reminded that dependence required gratitude. Only certain things remained wholly hers: her penmanship, neat as engraved type, her figures, which refused to lie even when people did, and memory. Her father bending over her shoulder at a desk, tapping a column with one blunt finger, and saying, "Again, Kitty." Accuracy is a kindness to your future self. That evening, at Lady Belgrave's winter reception, she had arrived not as guest but as appendage, carrying Mrs. O'Brien's vinaigrette and cards in a small reticule, smiling when presented and withdrawing when dismissed. The Belgrave rooms were all abundance, crystal branches flowering with candlelight, mirrors multiplying silk and jewels into a false infinity, footmen in plum and silver threading through crowds with trays of wine. Snow came down thick beyond the windows, blurring carriage lamps into halos. Christine had taken up her post near a side table and listened to the practised chatter of people for whom hardship was a decorative topic, suitable between courses. One gentleman spoke loudly of the poor as though describing weather over the sea. A dowager complained that her charity committee consumed afternoons. Mrs. O'Brien laughed at exactly the right moments. Then a footman in Belgrave livery appeared at Christine's elbow and murmured that her ladyship requested a word in the withdrawing room. It was not unusual to be summoned and not consulted. Christine set down the stack of calling cards and followed. The withdrawing room was smaller, overheated, and deliberately private. Lady Belgrave stood by the hearth in amber satin, one jewelled hand extended toward the fire as if blessing it. Her profile was celebrated in caricatures and society prints: imperious brow, sharp chin, a mouth accustomed to compliance. Beside her, near the escritoire, sat Mrs. O'Brien, gloved, composed, and watching Christine with the fixed brightness of a person about to enjoy an inevitability. On the writing table lay a folded document and an uncapped pen. "Miss O'Brien," said the Countess without offering a seat, "we shall be brief. Your dear stepmother and I have arranged a practical settlement of certain lingering family ambiguities. You will sign this declaration and spare everyone unnecessary trouble." Christine did not move toward the desk. "May I read it, Lady Belgrave?" A short pause, then the Countess gave a little tilt of her hand. "If you must." Christine lifted the pages. The paper was heavy, the legal phrasing clumsy in places where it had likely been copied by someone unused to law. Yet the meaning was plain enough beneath the flourishes. She, Christine Margaret O'Brien, relinquished any and all present or future claims arising from her late father's property, trusts, notes, securities, and associated interests, in exchange for ongoing familial support at Mrs. O'Brien's discretion. There was no sum named, no term, no witness line but one. She looked up first at her stepmother. "You prepared this." Mrs. O'Brien's smile did not alter. "For the family's convenience. You know how little aptitude you have for business, dear." For the first time that evening something like heat entered Christine's voice. "I keep every account in our house." Lady Belgrave made an impatient sound. "Do not become theatrical. The arrangement is generous. You are fed, clothed, and protected. Sign." Christine set the document back on the table, with precise alignment to the blotter's edge. Her hands were very steady now, the cold not yet in them. "No, Lady Belgrave," she said. "I will not sign away what my father left me to someone who says I have no aptitude to count it." The sentence hung in the room like a struck string. Mrs. O'Brien's face changed first, the smile collapsing into something raw and startled. The Countess's eyes narrowed to bright slits. "You forget yourself," she said softly. "I remember myself," Christine answered. The slap came quickly, more insult than force, ring against cheekbone. Christine's head turned. She did not step back. Mrs. O'Brien half rose, then sat again, colour high in her face. Lady Belgrave spoke toward the door without looking away from Christine. "Halt!" A footman appeared. "Miss O'Brien has overtired herself. Put her into the street until she recovers her manners." The footman hesitated one beat, long enough for conscience, too short for courage. He took Christine by the arm. She did not struggle. On the threshold she looked once at Mrs. O'Brien, who lowered her gaze and adjusted her glove, as if at a trivial inconvenience. The next moments blurred into bright cold. Steps, stone, a shove not brutal but final. Her slipper skidded on packed ice, and she went down hard to one knee in the snow. Behind her, laughter resumed. A dark carriage, crest barely visible beneath rime, slowed before the Belgrave house to avoid a wagon stalled at the turn. Inside sat the Duke of Ashford, his collar high against draughts, his face briefly lit and darkened by passing gaslight. As the carriage checked at the curb, he looked toward the townhouse door. A young woman in evening dress too thin for weather, no shawl, no gloves, was rising from the stones while a Belgrave footman retreated indoors. Even through snow and glass, the mark along her left cheek was visible. At the lamp-post nearby, a crossing sweeper boy of about 8 crouched in a ragged coat, coughing into both hands. The woman went first to him. She unclasped her own cloak, wool, plain, insufficient but warm, and wrapped it around his shoulders, bending to fasten the tie beneath his chin. Her mouth moved. The child answered. She straightened again, bare arms in the wind, and stood a moment in the falling snow before turning away. The carriage rolled past with traffic. Within a minute it slowed again. The Duke struck the roof once with his cane and spoke to the driver. The horses were checked, then turned with difficulty in the crowded street. By the time the carriage reached the Belgrave curb, the place where she had stood was empty. Christine walked the better part of a mile before finding a hackney she could afford, with the coins in her reticule. At her own door the maid admitted her with frightened eyes and fetched a candle without being asked. Servants hear what households deny. Mrs. O'Brien returned near midnight, flushed with wine and outrage and a determination already hardening into strategy. "You have made us ridiculous," she said in the morning room, dropping her cloak on a chair Christine had mended twice. "Do you know what Lady Belgrave reports? Insolence, delusion, ingratitude bordering on hysteria." Christine stood by the mantel to hide that her hands were still trembling from cold. "She asked me to sign away my father's estate. Your father's estate." "Mrs." O'Brien snapped, "is debt and paperwork and obligations you cannot comprehend. You will apologise tomorrow." "I will not." "Then you will leave this house." The words landed with bureaucratic neatness, not shouted, not theatrical, merely entered in the ledger. For an unprotected woman in London, ruin was swifter than snow melt. Respectability, once questioned, did not fray. It dissolved. Without reference, wages vanished. Without wages, lodging vanished. If the Belgrave circle began to whisper theft, impropriety, or instability, as they surely would, doors shut before they were knocked on. There were charities, yes, but charity could be a waiting room for hunger. There were marriages, but only for women presented as harmless and untouched by scandal. There were governess posts, but no mother hired a governess rumoured mad. Christine knew all this with the clear arithmetic of someone who had copied poor relief rolls and burial lists in her father's last winter. She also knew what signing would cost. Not merely money she had never seen, but legal extinction. Once renounced, her claim to her father's remaining property could be dismissed forever as youthful confusion corrected by wiser heads. His name, attached to fraud by implication, would have no one left to defend it in public. She could survive silent, perhaps. She could not survive false. Near dawn, as London's roofs paled and carts began again in the mews, a knock came at the front door, formal, measured, unexpected at that hour. The visitor was a woman of about 50 in dark wool and spotless cuffs, carrying herself with the unanswerable authority of long service in a great house. She introduced herself to the maid, was shown into the hall, and asked for Miss O'Brien. "I am Mrs. Fairfax," she said when Christine appeared, "housekeeper to His Grace the Duke of Ashford." Christine, suddenly aware of her borrowed wrapper and unpinned hair, inclined her head. "How may I help you?" Mrs. Fairfax produced a folded letter sealed with black wax. "His Grace asks that I place this in your hand and wait for your reply." The paper was thick, the handwriting spare and deliberate. "Miss O'Brien, having observed last evening circumstances that may have left your position uncertain, I write to offer temporary employment in my London household. Duties, copyist and assistant in accounts, under Mrs. Fairfax's supervision. Lodging, a separate room in the housekeeper's corridor, chaperoned and proper. Wages, £2 weekly, entered in writing and paid on Saturdays. No inquiry will be made into private matters you do not choose to disclose. If you accept, you may come at 11 o'clock this morning. A carriage will be sent. Ashford." There was no flourish at the signature, no sentiment, no demand for gratitude. It was, Christine thought with a sudden pressure in her throat, the first honest contract anyone had offered her since her father died. From the morning room behind her came the scrape of a chair, Mrs. O'Brien listening. "Who is it?" she called sharply. Christine folded the letter once exactly along its crease. The stakes arranged themselves with merciless clarity. Remain and submit. Leave and be slandered. Step into a stranger's household and risk becoming a story told in other women's drawing rooms with lifted brows. Yet risk in daylight was preferable to erasure in silk. She met Mrs. Fairfax's steady eyes. "Please tell His Grace," she said, "that I accept." Mrs. Fairfax gave a single approving nod, as if a difficult sum had balanced at last. "Very good, Miss O'Brien. The carriage will arrive at 11. When the housekeeper had gone, Christine stood a moment longer in the cold hall, letter in hand, listening to the city wake beyond the frosted panes. Whatever came next would not be gentle, but for the first time in 2 years it would be written. Mrs. O'Brien appeared in the doorway before Christine had moved 3 steps. "So," she said with dangerous softness, "you have found another patron already." Christine turned. "I have accepted employment." "Employment!" Mrs. O'Brien laughed once. "Do not insult us both with euphemism. A duke sends for you at dawn, and you pretend this is bookkeeping." "It is bookkeeping," Christine said, "in writing, with wages." That answer, calm and factual, seemed to enrage her more than defiance. "You will not leave this house under my roof to become a 9 days' wonder in other people's mouths." "I am no longer under your protection," Christine replied, and heard, in her own tone, an echo of her father's dry precision. "You dismissed me." Mrs. O'Brien's eyes flashed. "Then hear me clearly before you go. If you step into Ashford House, every door in London will hear why. I shall tell them you stole from me. Lady Belgrave will confirm your instability. You will not find so much as a nursery post." Christine's fingers tightened around the Duke's letter until the paper warmed. "Tell them what you choose," she said quietly. "I will answer when required." "For what? You have no proof of anything." Christine thought of the unsigned declaration on the Belgrave desk, of the missing witness line, of her stepmother's urgency. "Not yet," she said. By 11 she had packed 1 small trunk, 2 plain day dresses, underlinen, her father's worn copy of Plutarch, and a bundle of notebooks filled with columns in her neat hand. From below stairs the scullery maid pressed half a loaf into her hands with reddened eyes. The older footman, who had once carried her school satchel as a joke when she was 14, brought down the trunk and looked studiously at the floor. No one in the house said farewell aloud. The Ashford carriage was unadorned and punctual to the minute. Ashford House stood in Grosvenor Square behind iron railings black with wet snow. It was less ostentatious than Belgrave's rooms and far more severe. Clean lines, pale stone, windows bright but not blazing. Inside, heat met her in controlled waves rather than perfumed gusts. Everything appeared ordered, not staged. Rugs were thick but unfrayed, brass polished without showiness, clocks synchronized. Mrs. Fairfax led her not to a salon, but to the housekeeper's office, where an inkstand, account books, and 2 prepared sheets lay beside a sand shaker. "You will sign first," Mrs. Fairfax said, practical as ever. "Then you will eat. No one does sums well on an empty stomach." The agreement mirrored the letter. Title, duties, wages, lodging, notice period, and 1 line Christine had not expected. No member of this household will require personal disclosure beyond what concerns Miss O'Brien's safety and work. There was space for her signature and for Mrs. Fairfax as witness. Christine read every line, then signed, Christine Margaret O'Brien, Mrs. Fairfax blotted the page and nodded. Good. Keep your copy. You are in the East Corridor, room 7. Mrs. Ellis, my deputy, keeps the adjacent room. If anyone troubles you, you come directly to me. It was not tenderness. It was better. Structure. She met the Duke only once that first day, in a passage outside the library. He inclined his head. She curtsied. Miss O'Brien, he said. His voice was low, clipped, used to being obeyed, but not needlessly loud. Mrs. Fairfax tells me you have signed. Yes, Your Grace. You may address papers to Mr. Klein, my secretary. Any irregularity in accounts comes to him, or to me, if immediate. His grey gaze rested on her bruised cheek for a brief, unreadable second, and moved on. You will not be interrupted while working. Thank you, Your Grace. A pause. You owe me no gratitude for wages fairly paid, he said, and continued down the corridor. That night she sat in a side office, off the library, copying quarter rents by lamplight while sleet tapped at the panes. The ledgers were heavy and meticulously indexed, but not immaculate. No estate that large ever was. Ashford lands ran across 3 counties with town properties, tenant farms, timber, and shipping investments held through old partnerships. Figures came to her the way melody comes to musicians, as relationship, proportion, missing beat. By midnight she had corrected 2 transposed entries and found 1 debt listed twice under variant spelling. Mr. Klein checked, blinked, and said, "Good God!" under his breath. By Saturday she had her first wages in an envelope initialed by Mrs. Fairfax and entered in the wage book in a hand not her own. She went to sleep with the envelope under her pillow and woke before dawn with the unfamiliar sensation of breathing room. The room did not last. Mrs. O'Brien moved quickly. Within a week, a call Christine had expected from a stationer who once supplied Captain O'Brien's house did not come. When Mrs. Fairfax sent a footman to ask after delayed orders, he returned with a polite refusal. Their stock had, unfortunately, been allocated elsewhere. A retired colonel's wife, whom Christine had helped during her father's illness, sent a note in shaky script declining further correspondence until present misunderstandings are settled. At a dinner, 2 houses away, someone joked loudly enough to travel through servants' passages, that Ashford had taken up philanthropy in unusually feminine form. Then came the uglier edge. A tradesman arrived demanding payment of a debt in Christine's name for silk she had never ordered. A second letter, unsigned, warned Mrs. Fairfax that women turned out at night are rarely innocent by morning. Mrs. Fairfax read it, snorted, and fed it to the kitchen fire while Christine stood by, rigid with controlled humiliation. "Listen to me," the housekeeper said, not unkindly. "A lie that must travel anonymously already limps. Keep your work clean. Let them run themselves tired." Yet the whispers pressed into the house through every crack glass and gossip could find. Some servants watched Christine with curiosity sharpened by suspicion. Others, having seen enough of the world to recognise injustice on sight, watched with a wary protectiveness she neither requested nor forgot. Her own habits kept drawing notice despite her efforts to disappear into ledgers. In the mews, a young groom named Peter trapped his hand beneath the carriage shaft. Men shouted for brandy. Christine, passing with copied schedules, dropped to her knees in straw and mud, ordered cold water and clean cloth, and bound the swelling before the surgeon arrived. The stable-master blinked, then obeyed her as if she had always belonged there. By evening the story had travelled through kitchens and attics. Miss O'Brien stopped Peter bleeding like a trooper. On Tuesdays, 2 pensioners from Ashford's regiment, years, both lame, one half blind, came to the servants' hall to receive small stipends administered from the estate benevolence fund. The blind man carried letters from his son in Portsmouth he could not read. One week, Christine, seeing him fold and unfold the paper as if feeling could become sight, offered to read it aloud. She did so with plain respect, not pity. Next week he waited for her by name. Kindness, she discovered, was as politically dangerous as beauty. Men who preferred useful women, silent, began to bristle. Chief among them was Mr. Larkin, assistant steward for the Middleshire properties. Smooth hair, smooth cuffs, smooth explanations. He resented questions from anyone outside his rank, and resented them doubly from a woman with no title in the house. Twice he returned schedules she had queried with red marks, and the word irrelevant in the margin. A third time he visited the office while she worked and said, smiling thinly, "Miss O'Brien, household clerk's copy, they do not audit." Christine set down her pen. "Then someone should amend my instructions. His Grace asked for irregularities." Larkin's smile thinned further. "His Grace does not concern himself with trifles from women with grievances." When she reported the exchange to Mr. Klein, the secretary's mouth tightened. "Continue as instructed," he said, "and keep every draft." She did. It saved 30 families. The forged rent schedule appeared on a Tuesday beneath ordinary correspondence, revised tenancy terms for Ashford's Southmere holdings, with increases so steep they would force evictions by Easter. At first glance, the document bore correct seals and countersigns. At second glance, columns 3 and 5 did not reconcile with last quarter's crop failures. At third, she found the seam, a copied page inserted from a prior year, dates altered, notations in a hand imitating Klein's long S, but failing on the final stroke. Attached, almost as afterthought, was authorization to transfer 2 vacated cottages to commercial lease under an intermediary company Christine did not recognize. She carried the file to Klein. He swore softly, then went straight to Ashford's study. An hour later, Christine was summoned there. The Duke stood at the window, hands behind his back, while rain striped the glass. On his desk lay the schedule, her notes, and 3 prior ledgers pulled from archive shelves. "Walk me through it," he said. She did. Crop yield variance, copied folio, signature drift, false vacancy assumptions, intermediary shell. She kept to figures because figures did not tremble. When she finished, he asked, "How long would it have stood if you had copied and filed without comment?" "Long enough for notices to issue," she said. "Long enough that reversal would be costly and called impractical." He looked at her fully then, that same unreadable gaze sharpened now by something like anger. "Mr. Larkin is suspended pending inquiry. Klein will notify Middleshire by courier within the hour." Relief flashed through her and was gone. "Thank you, Your Grace." "This is not gratitude either," he said, echoing his earlier words. "It is debt. You have prevented theft done in my name." News travelled. In the servants' hall, respect settled around her like a cloak no one mentioned. So did sharper hostility from the small set of men whose advantages depended on nobody reading closely. The next blow came from outside. Mrs. O'Brien, denied quiet compliance, escalated. Through the Countess's circle she began circulating a story that Christine had always been unstable with numbers, apt to copy what she wished true. Lady Belgrave hinted, in a supper-room dense with listeners, that certain documents in Captain O'Brien's estate had gone missing after his death. By Friday, a barrister's clerk arrived at Ashford House with formal inquiry as to whether Miss O'Brien had brought family papers into the Duke's possession unlawfully. The insult was carefully engineered. Not enough to sue, enough to stain. Ashford received the clerk in his front study and sent him away with one sentence delivered by his solicitor. Any further imputation against my employee's character will be answered in court. That should have ended it. It did not. Slander thrives where proof sleeps. 3 nights later, while rain hammered the skylights and most of the household had gone to bed, Christine remained in the records room with a shawl over her shoulders and a candle guttering low. She had requested access to old shipping ledgers connected to Ashford's investments, partly routine, partly instinct. Captain O'Brien had once partnered in small coastal cargoes through intermediaries. If her stepmother was moving money, ghost traces might exist where respectable firms touched disreputable hands. Dust coated the topmost boxes. Her fingers blackened as she opened them. For 2 hours she found nothing but dull arithmetic. Then, in a ledger from 3 years prior, she saw her father's name misspelled in a margin notation exactly once. The same peculiar error Mrs. O'Brien made when writing in haste. O'Brien. The entry referenced payment of a legacy stabilisation debt to Harrowby and Company, a firm she knew distantly, as connected to Lady Belgrave's brother, Mr. Julian Harrowby. The amount matched to the pound a trust disbursement her father had mentioned in his final winter while teaching her to reconcile deferred notes. Her pulse changed. She pulled adjoining volumes, then old bank abstracts from a tin file. There it was again and again. Trust sums shifted into temporary debt servicing, routed through Harrowby shipping accounts, returned months later diminished by invented fees. Some columns had been altered after the fact, ink density different, nib width narrower. One codicil reference appeared in 2 places with 2 different dates, one impossible because it fell 10 days after her father's death. Fabricated debts, diversion over years, collusion. She sat very still, hearing only rain and the tiny hiss of candlewick. Then she began copying, fast and exact, page numbers, amounts, corresponding vouchers, every inconsistency pinned to source. At 2 a.m, she wrapped the copied sheets in oilskin and wrote one note to herself across the top page: not confusion, pattern. When she rose, the Duke was in the doorway. He had no coat on, only shirt sleeves and waistcoat, as if he too had been working and followed the light. His expression, in the half-dark, was harder than usual. "You should not be alone at this hour," he said. "Neither should you, Your Grace." A flicker that might have been the ghost of a smile vanished at once when he saw the spread of papers. "What have you found?" She handed him the top sheet. He read in silence, then took a second and third. By the end his jaw had tightened. "This touches Belgrave through Harrowby," he said. "Yes." "And your stepmother?" "Yes." He set the papers down with deliberate care. "Can you prove chain of custody on the originals?" "Some, not all. Enough to compel sworn testimony if the court is willing to examine bank routes." He was quiet a long moment. Rain struck the panes like thrown seed. "There is something you must hear from me before we proceed," he said at last. Christine waited. "That night at Belgrave's house," he said, each word measured as if cut. "I did not only see you in the street, I saw through the window before that. The Countess struck you. I saw it happen." The room seemed to narrow around the candle flame. "I ordered my carriage turned," he continued. "I did not get out at once. I told myself it was not my affair. I have spent my life avoiding entanglement presented as moral duty. By the time I acted, you were already gone." His hand, resting on the table edge, closed once. "You should know this, because I will not stand as your ally on a false premise. I helped late." Christine stared at him, not with shock, Some part of her had always guessed he had seen more than he first said, but with the fierce, aching recognition of an apology that sought no absolution. "Why tell me now?" she asked. "Because what comes next will be public," he said. "My testimony may matter. So does my failure." The old reflex in her, to minimise, to smooth, to make men comfortable in their conscience, rose and failed. She thought of snow on stone, of her father's voice, of 2 years spent being told that what she saw was confusion. "Then we proceed with the truth entire," she said, "including that minute." He inclined his head once, almost formal. "Including that minute." Outside, the rain slowed. In the records room, surrounded by ledgers that had hidden theft beneath respectable ink, Christine felt something inside her shift from endurance to intention. Survival had required silence. Restoration would require speech sharp enough to cut through drawing-room laughter and legal fog alike. She gathered the copied sheets into ordered stacks. "I do not want private settlement," she said, meeting his gaze. "I want my father's name cleared in public record. I want sworn statements. I want them made to deny what can be proved." Ashford answered without hesitation. "Then we prepare for exactly that." For the first time since the snow outside Belgrave's door, she believed the ground beneath her might hold. For several minutes after Ashford said, "Then we prepare for exactly that," neither of them moved. The candle guttered lower. The rain thinned to a whisper. At last he rang for a servant and sent for Klein and his solicitor, Mr. Fenwick, with instructions that admitted no delay. Fenwick arrived half-dressed beneath his coat, wig askew, legal bag in hand. Klein came with ledgers under one arm and spectacles not quite settled on his nose. In the records room, at 2:30 in the morning, Christine laid out what she had found while Fenwick listened without interruption, fingers steepled before his mouth. When she finished, he said, "If these originals remain intact, and if we secure even one disinterested witness to the codicil references, this is not rumour. This is actionable fraud." His gaze flicked to Ashford. "Which means they will move before we do." They did. At 9, while breakfast trays were still being carried upstairs, 2 Bow Street officers arrived with a magistrate's order authorising immediate search and seizure of all estate instruments, codicils, drafts, and related financial papers belonging by right to the O'Brien family and suspected to have been unlawfully removed. The complaint bore Mrs. O'Brien's signature, supporting affidavit Julian Harrowby, informal character note attached Lady Belgrave. Christine read the paper once and felt the blood leave her face. "It is broad enough to take half your records room," Fenwick said tightly. "Then they take nothing unsupervised," Ashford answered. "Klein, inventory every item before it leaves this house. Mrs. Fairfax, no one enters the east wing without one of ours present." The search lasted 4 hours. Drawers emptied, trunks opened, packet seals inspected, private order turned inside out by lawful hands. The officers were not cruel, merely efficient. Cruelty arrived in the watching. Footmen at corridor turns, maids with aprons stilled mid-fold. A house measuring, in real time, what scandal cost. From Christine's trunk they removed her copied extracts, 3 of her father's notebooks, and 2 letters she had never sent. From the records room they boxed every ledger containing O'Brien entries, including the volume where she had found the altered dates. Klein protested each seizure into the written inventory. One officer shrugged. "You may protest at hearing, sir." By noon, a printer's runner was already shouting headlines at the corner of Grosvenor Square. "Young woman under ducal protection accused of document theft, family dispute, questions of mental fitness." Mrs. Fairfax heard it through the fanlight, closed the door with controlled force and said, "Vultures are early today." What could be lost was no longer theoretical. If the papers vanished in custody or returned altered, the chain of proof dissolved. If Christine were charged before she could present her claim, she became, in law and gossip alike, an unreliable defendant instead of a wronged heir. If Ashford sheltered her against a warrant, he could be accused of obstruction, and every tenant case she had touched might be tainted as interference. By afternoon, the servants' hall was quieter than she had ever known it. Not hostile, worse, careful, people weighing their loyalty against fear. Peter, his bandaged hand much improved, passed her in the corridor and murmured, "We know what's true, miss." But he did not say it loudly. Fenwick's first counterstroke was swift. Secure living testimony before more paper could be seized. The most promising witness was Elias Penry, a retired clerk who had worked with Captain O'Brien's shipping office and was known for maddening accuracy. Christine remembered him as stooped, ink-fingered, and proud of his memory for signatures. "If Penry confirms your father's codicil references and Harrowby routing," Fenwick said, "we survive loss of some originals. Without him, we are arguing handwriting against title." By dusk, Christine, Klein and Fenwick were in a hired carriage rattling toward Lambeth, where Penry lodged above a cooper's yard. Ashford wanted to come. Fenwick insisted his presence would alarm a nervous witness and turn testimony into politics before it was sworn. The Duke let them go with visible reluctance. The cooper's yard smelled of wet oak and old smoke. Penry's landlady opened the door a crack, saw the solicitor's card and began wringing her hands. "You're too late," she said. Christine stepped forward. "Too late for what?" "Two gentlemen called this morning. Proper they looked. Good coats, gloves. Said Mr. Penry had kin in Surrey and must be moved for his chest. Paid his quarter in advance. Took his trunk and papers. He went with them." "Did he seem willing?" Fenwick asked. The woman hesitated. "He seemed frightened." "Names?" They gave none. "Direction?" She pointed vaguely south. "Bridge Road first, then I shut the door. I'm a widow, sir. I mind my own." Fenwick took a long breath through his nose. Klein swore under his breath in a way Christine had never heard from him. In Penry's room they found a mattress, a cracked basin, and beneath one floorboard, loose from damp, a single scrap of paper folded twice. 3 numbers, a date, and the initials J.H. beside a pound amount matching one of Christine's diverted entries. Not proof, not enough. On the ride back she sat rigid, gloved hands clasped too tightly in her lap. Rain began again, sharp against the carriage roof. "This may still be salvaged," Fenwick said, not quite meeting her eyes. "We will petition immediate injunction over seized materials. We may locate Penry." "May," she repeated. No one answered. At Ashford House the second blow was waiting. A note from the magistrate's office required Christine's appearance for preliminary examination in 2 days on suspicion of unlawful possession of estate papers. Attached was a recommendation, not yet order, that she be restricted from further access to relevant financial records, pending inquiry. Fenwick set the note down gently. "Until hearing, opposing counsel will argue you can contaminate any remaining evidence. In practical terms," he looked to Ashford. Ashford's face had gone expressionless in the way it did when he was most angry. "In practical terms, Miss O'Brien must stand away from account rooms for now." The words were clean, formal, and cut like wire. Christine nodded once because she did not trust herself to speak. When she reached her room, she closed the door and leaned her forehead against the panel, breathing in shallow bursts. Her table still held sharpened pens, laid out from habit. Her wage envelope for the week lay unopened beside Plutarch. Work had been the one place no one could call her mad or ungrateful and make it stick. Columns either balanced or they did not. Now even that ground had been kicked away. A soft knock came. "Mrs." Fairfax entered without waiting, carrying tea she knew would go cold. "You are not dismissed," the housekeeper said immediately, as if batting down a thought before it formed. "You are sidelined by strategy." "It feels the same in the bones," Christine said. Mrs. Fairfax's mouth tightened, then softened. "I won't lie to you, child. This is bad. They mean to tire you, isolate you, make you accept compromise for peace." She set the tray down. "Do not offer it." After she left, Christine sat by the dark window until the glass reflected only her own face. Pale, bruising, faded now to yellow shadow. Eyes older than 22. For the first time since accepting Ashford's offer, she wondered if stepping into his house had doomed not only herself, but everyone who had treated her fairly. If she failed publicly, Mrs. O'Brien's story would become history. Captain O'Brien's careful honour would remain attached to whispered fraud forever. Near midnight she rose, opened the wage envelope, and copied the amount into her notebook with a steady hand. It was the only line she could still control. In his study across the house, Ashford did not sleep. The fire had burned down to red ribs. On his desk lay Fenwick's briefs, the search inventory, the magistrate note, and one folded clipping from an evening sheet he had not meant to keep. Ashford's charity or Ashford's folly. He set it aside and stared at the dark pane where his own reflection hovered over the square. He had spent most of his adult life turning feeling into procedure. It had seemed sensible. His father, brilliant and erratic, had trusted the wrong men until debt nearly swallowed 2 estates. His mother, exhausted by scandal, taught her sons that attachment was leverage waiting to be used. At 26, Ashford entrusted transitional management to his closest friend while he sat through his father's final illness. That friend forged timber contracts, sold winter reserves, and left tenants to burn furniture through January. By the time Ashford discovered it, 3 cottages had gone under and 1 child died of fever in a room without fuel. He prosecuted. The friend hanged himself before trial. Afterward, people called Ashford cold as if it were temperament, not engineering. Distance meant no one entered far enough to betray him. It also meant no one entered far enough to be protected quickly. 1 fatal minute in a carriage had proven the flaw. A tap at the door. Briggs, his oldest valet, grey at the temples and still upright as a guardsman. "Your Grace, it is past 2. "I am aware." Briggs hesitated, then set a decanter down. "May I speak plainly?" "You always do. You are afraid of doing too little again," Briggs said, "and afraid of doing too much now." Ashford gave a humourless breath that might have been a laugh. "Remarkably efficient, Briggs." "I've had practice." Ashford rested both hands on the desk edge, looking not at Briggs but at the papers. "If I press publicly, they call it ducal coercion on behalf of a woman under my roof. If I stand back, they bury her in procedure and say I wisely avoided scandal. Every path smells of cowardice in different clothing." Briggs was silent a moment. "Then choose the cowardice you can live with, sir." When he had gone, Ashford took out foolscap and began to write a statement in his own hand. What he had seen at Belgrave's window, what he had failed to do for that minute, what he was prepared to swear under oath despite personal embarrassment. No legal polishing, no concealment. If they meant to paint him as puppet master, he would at least remove the lie that he had acted from spotless distance. Halfway down the second page, his pen paused over an admission he had no language for in legal terms, that Christine's presence had altered the architecture of his caution, that her discipline drew him because it looked like his and unlike it at the same time, that he feared with irrational violence the thought of her being publicly broken while he remained impeccable. He did not write that line. He folded the sheet, sealed it, and addressed it to Fenwick for use if needed. Then he sat in the dark until dawn, listening to the house wake around a case that could still be lost. The crisis ripened 2 evenings later. Fenwick returned from chambers mud-spattered and grim, carrying fresh notices bound with red tape. Klein, summoned from supper, read the first and cursed outright. Mrs. Fairfax sent the lesser servants from the corridor before rumours could breed in real time. "They've done it," Fenwick said. "Harrowby has filed criminal complaint for forgery and fraudulent conversion of trust property, naming Miss O'Brien principal actor, and implying inducement by unknown parties. The magistrate has not issued full arrest warrant yet, but he will if she fails to appear at special examination tomorrow night." "Tomorrow night," Ashford said. Fenwick slid over the second paper. "Location requested by complainants and absurdly granted for convenience of principal witnesses. Belgrave House. During Lady Belgrave's 12th night assembly." Klein stared. "A legal inquiry in a ballroom?" "An informal evidentiary taking before formal charge," Fenwick said with contempt. "Perfectly deniable. Perfectly theatrical." Christine read the page, every word suddenly sharp. They meant to stage her ruin in the room where she had been struck and expelled, before exactly the audience most eager to believe the worst. If she refused to attend, she could be called evasive and arrested by morning. If she attended unprepared, she could be humiliated, shouted down, perhaps declared unstable by those same polished voices. Fenwick continued, "There is more. A physician retained by Mrs. O'Brien has submitted opinion, without examination, that Miss O'Brien has shown fixed delusional pattern regarding inheritance. It is flimsy, but in such a setting, flimsy can poison a room." For one suspended second, no one spoke. Then a footman appeared at the door, pale. "Beg pardon, Mr. Fenwick. 2 gentlemen to see you, clerks from Doctors' Commons." Fenwick frowned. "At this hour." They were shown in. Mr. Allen and Mr. Pierce, junior registry clerks, Christine recognised at once. Months ago, before all this, she had read letters to Allen's injured father in the servants' hall, and helped Pierce draft a petition for his widowed sister's pension, refusing any coin for it. Both men looked terrified and determined. Allen removed his hat. "Sir, we were told not to involve ourselves, but we have compared register abstracts against Harrowby filings. There are discrepancies, material ones. We brought certified copies." He held out a packet with shaking hands. "If presented before accusation is formally entered, they must be read." Pierce added, voice tight, "And we heard Penry has been moved. He sent a line through a carter yesterday, just initials and a place. We think we can find him by morning if we're not followed." Hope and risk arrived together so sharply Christine almost swayed. Fenwick took the packet as if it were glass. "Gentlemen, you understand what this may cost your positions." Allen gave a crooked, frightened smile. "Miss O'Brien once said figures are a kind of oath. We thought we might keep one." Ashford stepped forward. "You will have protection leaving this house." When they had gone, rain beginning again against the windows, Fenwick spread the certified copies on the table. Enough to challenge dates, enough to force denial in public if one dared. He looked up at Christine. "This is still dangerous. They control the room. Belgrave will try to drown you in ridicule before facts land." Christine felt fear move through her and settle into something steadier. "Then I will speak before they can." Ashford's gaze held hers. "If we do this, we do it openly. I walk in beside you, no retreat by side door." Outside, carriage wheels hissed over Whetstone. Somewhere in the square a boy called the late edition. Inside Ashford House, plans were made in low voices over damp papers and cooling candles while the city leaned towards spectacle. By midnight, one final note arrived by messenger with no signature, only 3 words in a cramped hand. "Penry alive." Hounslow Road. True or trap, no one could tell. Fenwick folded it once. The clock in the hall began to strike 1. Tomorrow night at Belgrave House they would either recover her name or lose it where all London could watch. The clock in the hall began to strike 1. By the final chime, Ashford had given 3 orders, each as spare as a blade. Fenwick, draft petition for immediate sworn examination and seizure of all contested originals at point of presentation. Done. Klein, prepare abstract index by folio and date. Miss O'Brien leads. Klein nodded, already uncapping ink. And no one goes to Hounslow Road alone. Lady Belgrave's assembly blazed with light enough to mock winter itself. The front steps had been swept clear, but snow still banked along the rails in grey ridges. Carriage wheels hissed on meltwater and slush. Inside, heat, perfume and candle wax pressed against the skin. Masks were optional this year, which suited the room. Most faces preferred not to hide while witnessing a public unmaking. When Christine entered on Ashford's arm, conversation faltered by degrees. First, nearest the door, then outward like ripples on a pond. Heads turned. Fans paused mid-air. A violinist near the musician's dais lowered his bow without meaning to. She wore dove-grey silk, borrowed from no one, altered from one of her own plain gowns by Mrs. Fairfax's capable hands. No jewels except her father's small gold watch on a black ribbon at her waist. Her hair was simply dressed. The bruise on her cheek had faded to memory, but memory in that room had good eyesight. Ashford did not hurry her. He did not shield her either. He walked beside her to the far card table, where green baize had replaced gaming cards with legal paper, sealing wax, and a silver inkstand as if law were a parlour amusement. Mrs. O'Brien stood near the hearth in claret satin, white-knuckled beneath lace gloves. Lady Belgrave glittered in black and amber, chin high. Beside her, Julian Harrowby wore injured dignity like a perfectly fitted coat. A magistrate's deputy, Mr. Searle, thin, careful, overawed by chandeliers, cleared his throat and announced that preliminary evidentiary statements would be heard regarding complaint filed by Mr. Harrowby and Mrs. O'Brien against Miss Christine O'Brien for unlawful possession and falsification of estate instruments. There was a murmur of satisfaction. Fenwick stepped forward. Before accusation proceeds, my client requests direct denial or admission by complainants of specific instruments in their knowledge. In public, since public accusation was chosen. Belgrave laughed softly. How dramatic! Christine set her gloved fingertips on the table edge. No, Lady Belgrave. Merely efficient. She opened a leather packet and laid out 3 documents, one by one, parallel to the table seam. My father's trust memorandum, dated January 14th, signed Daniel O'Brien and witnessed by Elias Penry. A second. Codicil reference ledger, page 42, showing scheduled disbursement to me at majority. A third. Transfer abstract routed through Harrowby and Company under heading Legacy Stabilisation Debt. She looked first at Mrs. O'Brien. Will you deny aloud that these documents exist in your knowledge? Mrs. O'Brien's lips parted, closed, then curved. I deny that you understand anything you are waving before your betters. Scattered laughter. Christine turned to Harrowby. Will you deny routing trust sums through your firm under fabricated debt headings? Harrowby smiled with practised boredom. I deny all fantasies generated by female resentment. More laughter, thinner now. She faced Lady Belgrave. Will you deny presenting me with renunciation papers on this floor and ordering me removed when I refused? The Countess's eyes flashed. I deny indulging insolent dependence. If you were removed, no doubt there was cause. Ashford spoke for the first time, voice low and carrying to the far mirrors. I witnessed her struck before she was removed." Silence fell so abruptly the violinist dropped his bow outright. Belgrave turned with icy disbelief. "Your Grace, surely you do not mean—" "I mean exactly what I said." "Mister—" Searle blinked, made frantic notes, and glanced at Fenwick as if asking whether dukes were permitted to detonate drawing-rooms. Christine did not look at Ashford. She kept her gaze on the papers, then lifted the trust memorandum. "Let us keep to numbers, since character has become everyone's preferred fiction." She tapped the first figure. "Disbursement, £2,000, due at my majority. On this abstract," she set down the Harrowby transfer, "the same sum appears 3 weeks later as emergency debt payment, invoice code LS-17. There is no corresponding debt in my father's shipping books." She turned a page. 3 months later, partial return, £1,340 less port losses in a quarter, when no vessels under that code sailed. A rustle moved through the room, people leaning despite themselves. Harrowby gave a dismissive snort. "Columns can be copied to say anything." "Quite true," Christine said, "which is why date ink and nib variation matter." She slid forward a magnifying lens Fenwick had brought. "This amendment here was written later with a narrower nib. The downstroke pressure differs. Mr. Klein—" Klein stepped from the side, pale but steady. "I compared it against office drafts this afternoon. Miss O'Brien's observation is correct." Harrowby pivoted. "You are Ashford's paid man." "And you are the complainant," Klein said. "Bias is not monopoly." A few people actually laughed. Lady Belgrave lifted her chin. "Even if some clerical untidiness occurred, it proves nothing criminal. Families settle matters privately. Only hysterics drag them into spectacle." Christine's face did not change. "Private settlement was offered to me as legal extinction, without term or sum, in this house, by force." She turned to Searle. "Sir, I request the complainants be asked directly whether they will swear under oath tonight to the accuracy of all Harrowby Trust routing entries and to the authenticity of all codicil dates submitted with complaint." Searle swallowed. "That may be put," Fenwick said, "and entered." Harrowby's confidence flickered for the first time. "This is absurd. No one swears in a ballroom." "Then perhaps no one should accuse in one," Christine replied. Before Harrowby could answer, a commotion rose near the entry, wet boots on marble, hushed protests from footmen. Allen and Pierce pushed through, breathless, coats damp with sleet. Between them came an elderly man wrapped in a rough blanket, face grey with exhaustion, one hand clamped over a rattling chest. "Elias Penry." Gasps spread like sparks. Penry gripped Allen's arm and wheezed, "Don't let him send me back!" Fenwick was already moving. "Mr. Searle, witness present and willing. We request immediate deposition before this assembly, or at minimum in adjoining room with officer and 2 clerks." Searle looked stricken, then galvanised by procedure. "Adjoining room, at once!" Harrowby barked, "I object. This man is unwell." Penry turned his head and spat, not elegantly, at Harrowby's polished shoe. "So was your honesty." For one stunned heartbeat no one breathed. Then the room erupted. The adjoining withdrawing room, scene of the first demand, filled with too many bodies and too little air. Searle took the writing chair. 2 Bow Street officers stood at the door. Fenwick, Klein and Christine arranged documents on the escritoire where Lady Belgrave had once laid her renunciation paper. Harrowby paced like a trapped hound. Mrs. O'Brien refused a chair but held the back of one as if for balance. Belgrave stood apart, furious and regal, as though attendance itself were concession. Penry coughed until his whole frame shook. Christine poured water with steady hands and held the glass while he drank. "Can you testify?" Fenwick asked quietly. Penry nodded. If I stop, I die anyway. Might as well be useful first. Deposition began. Name, former position, relation to O'Brien, accounts. Penry's voice cracked but did not fail. Yes, he had witnessed Captain O'Brien's trust memorandum. Yes, the codicil reference on page 42 was entered in his own hand under dictation. Yes, invoice code LS-17 was not debt but internal temporary marker for trust transit funds, pending release. Harrowby lunged verbally at once. Lies of a dismissed clerk. He was let go for drink. Penry bared worn teeth. I was let go for refusing your backdated vouchers. Searle held up a hand. Mr. Harrowby, you will wait. Harrowby did not wait. Miss O'Brien coached him. This is collusion. Christine turned to Penry. Mr. Penry, in what year did you first meet me? He squinted. You were 12. Ink on your nose. Your father said you added faster than junior clerks and slower than saints. A suppressed chuckle from Alan. Were you in communication with me these past months? No. Did I know where you were hidden? No. Who moved you from Lambeth? Penry's jaw hardened. 2 men hired by Harrowby's office boy. Took me to a house on Hounslow Road. Said I was resting until this blew over. Harrowby exploded. Prove it! Alan stepped in, voice shaking but clear. I can! I followed the office boy from Carman's yard. We found the house this morning. Pierce brought a constable. The constable waits downstairs. All eyes snapped to Pierce, who produced a folded paper with official seal. Statement taken at 6 o'clock. Belgrave struck in colder fashion. Even if true, irregular confinement of a pensioner does not establish fraud in high accounts. We are drowning in clerical mud while this girl's instability goes unaddressed. I have a physician's opinion. From a man who never examined me, Christine said. Belgrave's mouth thinned. He examined your behaviour. No, Christine answered, and now there was iron under every word. He examined your convenience. Mrs. O'Brien suddenly stepped forward, abandoning poise. Convenience? I fed you, clothed you, took you in when no one else would have you. You were always difficult, always watching, judging, making little notes as if the household were your ledger to command. Christine faced her fully. It was my father's household. It was my marriage, Mrs. O'Brien cried, my security. Do you know what widows are left with when men die praised and disorganised? Bills. Men like him. She stabbed a finger toward Harrowby, who smile and explain necessity. I did what women must. By stealing from a daughter to preserve appearances, Christine said. Mrs. O'Brien's expression cracked, grief and rage showing through paint and powder. You would have left me nothing. I offered you household annuity twice in draft letters you burned, Christine said, and produced carbon copies from her packet. You chose total control, Fenwick murmured to Searle, who nodded and marked the copies. Harrowby made one last lunge. These papers are all from Ashford interests. Tainted. Seize them as fabricated. Searle looked from one face to another, then to the growing stack. Certified Commons extracts, Penry deposition, constable statement, Klein verification, duplicated dates impossible on their face. He squared his shoulders as if suddenly remembering he had authority. Bow Street, he said to the officers, voice carrying. Take charge of all contested instruments here presented, plus documents in complainant's possession tonight relating to O'Brien Trust and Harrowby transfers. Seal an inventory in my sight. Belgrave went white with fury. You cannot search my guest's effects in my own house. Madam, I can, where documentary fraud is credibly alleged. Harrowby tried to push past. An officer caught his arm. In the corridor beyond, voices rose as words spread. Papers seized, Clark found, Harrowby challenged, Duke witness. Scandal was changing owners in real time. It happened then, the moment the room would remember inaccurately, for years. Ashford stepped beside Christine, not touching her yet, and said, clearly enough for Searle, Fenwick, and half the doorway to hear, "Miss O'Brien, when this is done, if you wish it, I ask you to marry me." Shock hit like thunder. Mrs. O'Brien gave a strangled laugh. Belgrave hissed, "There! At last!" Christine turned her head slowly toward him. Her eyes were bright but unwavering. "Your Grace," she said, "I will not answer while my name is still under accusation and my father's under stain. First, restoration in law. First, sworn testimony entered. First, these papers in official custody." A heartbeat. Then, softer without lowering her gaze, "Ask me again when I stand as myself." Ashford bowed his head once. "As you wish." Searle, perhaps to stop the room from combusting entirely, rapped the table. "Proceed with seizure!" It was nearly 3 in the morning when they emerged from Belgrave House. Snow had begun again, finer now, turning carriage lamps to halos. The crowd that had gathered, newsboys, coachmen, curious servants from neighbouring houses, pressed forward until Bow Street officers shoved them back. Someone shouted a question about arrests. Someone else yelled, "Is she the thief or the heiress then?" No one answered. Fenwick tucked the sealed evidence satchel beneath his coat as if it were an infant. "Directly to magistrate lockbox," he told Searle. "No stops." Searle, exhausted and suddenly very sober, nodded. "At 9, formal hearing. Miss O'Brien must attend." "I will," Christine said. In the carriage, opposite Ashford, she sat upright with both hands clenched in her lap. The adrenaline that had held her through hours of attack drained all at once, leaving shaking she could not master. He reached forward, paused, then set his gloved hand lightly over hers. Not command, permission asked in touch. She turned her hand beneath his, clasping back hard. Only when the carriage moved did she realize she had not cried once that night. She also realized she wanted, with almost childlike force, to put her head against something solid and stop being the sharpest person in every room. At Ashford House, Mrs. Fairfax met them in the front hall, in wrapper and cap, eyes fierce with wakefulness. "Well?" she demanded. Fenwick, arriving breathless behind them, managed a tired grin. "Not lost." Mrs. Fairfax looked at Christine's face, then at Ashford's hand still around hers, and said briskly, "Kitchen, both of you. Tea first, collapse after." In the warmth of the back parlour, with the house mostly sleeping and only the banked range ticking, Christine wrapped numb fingers around a mug and stared at the steam. "I kept hearing her laugh," she said abruptly. "From that first night, even while I was speaking." Ashford answered quietly. "I kept hearing the carriage wheels stop. The minute." She looked up. "You did not hide it." "No." "Thank you." He held her gaze. "You did not let me turn you into a rescue." A ghost of a smile touched her mouth. "I dislike inaccurate accounting." He almost smiled back, then sobered. "At 9, they will try again in formal chamber, less theatre, more traps." "I know." She set down the mug with deliberate care. "But tonight they had to hear me deny nothing and apologise for nothing. That mattered." Mrs. Fairfax appeared in the doorway with blankets, as if they were children. "You can philosophise at noon," she said. "You have 2 hours to sleep before law starts again." The magistrate hearing was ugly, but clean. With seized documents sealed and logged, Penry's deposition entered, and Commons' certifications read aloud, the complaint against Christine for theft did not survive first scrutiny. Searle, now very exact, declined to issue warrant and referred fraud allegations for full civil and criminal inquiry into trust diversion. Harrowby's counsel requested delay. Fenwick objected. The objection held. When they stepped out into the pale morning, Christine stopped on the court steps, as if unsure whether ground still existed. Klein came up beside her, hat askew, eyes red from no sleep. "Miss O'Brien," he said awkwardly, "for what it is worth, the index you made last night saved us twice. You cross-referenced faster than Chambers clerks." She nodded, unable to speak for a second. Then, "Thank you for standing there when it was dangerous," he coloured. "You stood first." The first truly quiet conversation happened 3 weeks later, in the Ashford Conservatory just after sunset. Outside, the last dirty snow had melted from the square, leaving wet earth smell and the first brave tips of crocus in stone beds. Inside, glass panes held the day's warmth. Lemons hung pale among glossy leaves. Water ticked in a narrow pipe. Christine stood by the long table where seed trays were set, reading a draft settlement schedule Fenwick had sent over. Footsteps behind her, familiar now. "May I come in?" Ashford asked, though he already had. She folded the paper. "You own the room." "I was asking you." She turned fully. He looked more tired than at Belgrave, less armoured. No cravat pin, no audience, only him. "Fenwick says Mrs. O'Brien will contest annuity terms," he said. "She will. She believes concession is death." "And you?" "I believe ambiguity is death." She gave a small breath. "I want figures fixed, not sentimental promises." "Good." He stepped closer to the seed table, hands behind his back as if resisting habit. "Christine, I asked you a question in a room designed to wound you. It was badly timed and perhaps selfishly timed." "It was honest." "It was." He looked at the lemon leaves, then at her. "I had planned to wait. Then they began tearing at your name like carrion birds, and I thought, absurdly, that if I could place my title between you and them for 1 second, I should." She watched him without interruption. "I don't want to place anything between you and your own life," he said. "That is the point I failed to make. I don't want gratitude. I don't want obligation repaid. I want—" He stopped, jaw tightening once. Began again more plainly. "I love you. I have for some time, and I knew it first as fear. Fear of failing you through distance, fear of using power badly through nearness. Neither fear improves with silence." She went very still. He continued, voice rougher now. "You are not convenient. You are not decorative. You are exacting, and you see through me with alarming efficiency. You make me want to be less careful with myself and more careful with everyone else. If you do not want marriage, say so, and I will not ask again. But do not doubt what I am asking." The conservatory seemed suddenly too small for breath. Christine set the settlement papers down. "When my father died, people kept offering me safety that meant disappearance. You were the first person to offer terms in writing." Ashford's mouth quirked despite himself. "A romantic beginning." "It was." Her eyes shone, but her voice stayed steady. "At Belgrave, when you asked, I could not bear to be absorbed into your name before reclaiming mine. I still cannot. I need the restoration order entered. I need the trust transferred into my control. I need Mrs. O'Brien's testimony recorded. You shall have all 3 whether or not you marry me." "I know." She took 1 step toward him. "That is why I can answer now." He did not move. "Yes," she said. "Ask me again properly, and yes." For the first time since she had known him, he looked briefly undone, relief striking straight through discipline. He reached for her hand, then stopped. "Properly?" She lifted her chin, mock severity warm at the edges. "You are a duke. Surely you can manage one decent proposal outside a legal ambush?" A low laugh escaped him. "Miss Christine Margaret O'Brien, will you marry me when your legal restoration is complete, with your property in your own right? and with whatever marriage settlement you and Fenwick deem intolerably rigorous." She smiled then, sunlight breaking through austere weather. "I will, your grace, on condition that you continue to be corrected when your numbers drift." "God preserve me," he murmured and kissed her. It was not hurried, not tentative. It was the opposite of that night in snow, chosen, witnessed only by lemon trees and glass. No one pushed, no one pleading. When they parted, he rested his forehead lightly against hers. "I should tell you," he said quietly. "Briggs has a betting book below stairs on, when I would stop looking like a man being sentenced." "What are the odds?" "Ruined, I expect." She laughed into his shoulder, and for a moment the long winter inside her eased. The settlement hearing in Chancery was held on a bright morning that made everyone look less tragic than they preferred. Mrs. O'Brien sat rigid beside counsel, hat-brim trembling minutely with each breath. Harrowby, paler than fashion allowed, answered questions too carefully. Under oath and confronted with seized ledgers, certified Commons extracts, and Penry's deposition, both conceded administrative irregularities that the judge translated, with dry cruelty, into misappropriation and unlawful diversion. Terms were entered: restoration of Christine's trust with arrears and interest, transfer of management authority, formal correction in record-clearing Captain O'Brien of debt fraud implication, annuity provision for Mrs. O'Brien, fixed and limited, contingent on non-interference, referral of Harrowby accounts for further penalties. Outside court, Mrs. O'Brien caught Christine by the sleeve before footman could intervene. "You have won," she whispered, voice ragged. "Are you satisfied to see me sent off like a servant?" Christine looked at the hand on her sleeve until it dropped. "No," she said, "I am satisfied to have what was mine named as mine. You still have an annuity and your sister in Bath. Use both better than you used me." "Mrs." O'Brien's mouth trembled with something that might have been hatred, might have been shame. She turned away first. Lady Belgrave attempted for a month to behave as if nothing had altered. Her Thursdays continued, candles bright, musicians paid, wine excellent. But rooms that once overflowed began to show gaps. 2 empty chairs near the hearth, then 6. A missing diplomat's wife, a duchess sending regrets twice, younger men attending once for curiosity and not returning. No formal censure ever came. Worse, invitations simply thinned. On a damp April evening, Christine and Ashford attended briefly out of strategic necessity. Belgrave received them in a room too large for its occupants, smile fixed like porcelain under strain. "Miss O'Brien," she said, not quite choking on the name, "how gratifying that misunderstandings have been clarified." Christine glanced around at the half-empty glitter. "Yes, Lady Belgrave. Accuracy can be unfashionable at first." Belgrave's fans snapped shut with a hard click. Their wedding took place in May in a small chapel off Berkeley Street, with rain on the stone and lilacs in jars, because Mrs. Fairfax declared Lily's funereal nonsense. No crush at the doors, no pages in silver. Fenwick signed as witness with visible satisfaction. Klein blotted his name twice from nerves. Allen and Pierce stood in back in borrowed coats. Penry, wrapped in a better blanket and still cough-ridden, cried openly and denied it. Briggs lost his wager and paid out in sovereigns to cheering footmen. At the altar, Ashford's voice was steady. Christine's was clearer than bells. Afterward, at breakfast in Ashford House, Mrs. Fairfax pressed cake on everyone and told the Duke to sit down when he tried to refill Christine's cup himself. "You can be devoted without being underfoot, Your Grace." "Yes, Mrs. Fairfax," he said meekly to general delight. In early autumn, Christine unlocked the front door of her father's restored townhouse lease with a key that stuck once, then turned. The drawing room had been stripped of heavy drapery and fitted with plain tables, slates, shelves, and 2 long benches built by Ashford carpenters. On the mantel sat ledgers, primers, and a jar of sharpened pencils. A painted sign in the entry, done by Peter, the former groom, on his Sunday off, read, "O'Brien's Schoolroom. Letters, figures, accounts for tenants' daughters and soldiers' widows." The first morning, 6 girls arrived in boots too big and ribbons too bright. 3 widows came after noon, hands rough from washing, faces wary. Christine wrote the alphabet in a clear hand, then columns beneath it. "No one here is bad at sums," she told them, "only untaught." A widow with a scar over one eye muttered, "My late husband said figures were men's business." Christine handed her a slate. "Then we shall commit a revolution before luncheon." Laughter, uncertain then real. From the window she saw Ashford across the street, having pretended business nearby and failed to conceal that he was watching. She lifted a brow. He tipped his hat and moved on, as agreed. Door opened, not occupied. The year's first hard snow came in December. Christine stepped from her carriage near St. George's after a committee meeting ran late. The curb was iced, lamps haloed, laughter spilling from a nearby house where music thumped behind glass. For one suspended instant memory overlaid present so precisely, her breath caught. Then she heard a familiar cough. At the lamppost stood a boy of 9 or 10 with a crossing broom and red ears, trying to stamp warmth into his feet. Without thinking, she crossed to him, unfastened the thick wool cloak at her shoulders, and wrapped it around him while the footman protested. "You'll freeze, my lady!" "I have another in the carriage," she said. The boy peered up, startled. "Why do you do that?" Christine tied the knot under his chin with quick fingers. "Because someone once did not wait long enough," she said, and then, gentler, "and because you are coughing." Ashford had seen from the carriage window again, this time with the door already open before the horses fully stopped. He came to stand beside her in the snow, no hesitation now, and offered his arm. She took it. Together they walked toward the waiting carriage, leaving behind one less shivering child, and no laughter that could touch them.